She looked like a fourth-grade teacher who had stayed too late grading spelling tests. That was exactly the problem. Sera Dunning was 31 years old, 5'5", and wearing a cardigan the color of old mustard. Her dark hair was clipped up with a small barrette that had a cartoon sun on it. The kind children dropped is not lost and found and never came back for. She carried a canvas tote bag printed with the words "Reading is fundamental" over one shoulder and a stack of parent consent forms tucked under her arm. At 9:47 on a Thursday evening, she was one of the last people at Ridgecrest Elementary School, and she was crossing a parking lot that hadn't had half its overhead lights replaced in 15 years. She had meant to leave by 7. The parent-teacher conferences had run long the way they always did in October. A dozen worried families crowded into a room that smelled of Elmer's glue and dry erase marker. Everyone anxious about their kid, everyone wanting a few more minutes. Sera had given them all the time she had. It was the one thing she gave freely without counting the cost. She was cutting across the far end of the lot when she heard it, the sharp, deliberate pop of a car window giving way. She stopped walking. 2 men crouched beside Principal Aguirre's black Honda Accord, the one with the PTA bumper sticker and the county school board parking permit. One was working a slim gym along the door seal. The other stood lookout, turning slow circles with his thumbs hooked in his waistband like he owned every inch of asphalt within 10 blocks. Sera pulled out her phone. She pressed record and dialed 911 without thinking about it. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at Ridgecrest Elementary on Garfield Avenue. 2 males are breaking into a vehicle in the parking lot. I have them on video. The lookout heard her voice. His eyes found her across the dark lot like a searchlight finding a single boat in black water. She kept filming. The dispatcher told her to move away from the situation and wait for officers. Sera took 3 steps back toward the school entrance, holding the lens steady. By the time the 2 men jogged off into the alley behind the lot, she had 41 seconds of clear footage. When the patrol car arrived 12 minutes later, she handed the responding officer her phone and waited calmly while he reviewed, and forwarded the video to evidence. She was calm the entire time. She should have asked for an escort to her car. She would think about that later. By the time she had finally shouldered her tote and walked toward her old Civic, it was close to 10:15. The patrol car had gone. The school entrance had auto-locked behind her. The nearest working streetlight was half a lot away. She was halfway to the Civic when the shadow at the end of the row moved. Not shifted, moved, deliberately, with weight behind it. A man stepped from between 2 parked cars, and then 2 more emerged from opposite angles, cutting off the path back to the street. The one in front was thick-necked and shaved-headed, with tattoos that climbed past his jaw. He moved with the unhurried ease of someone who had never once in his adult life been told no and made to believe it. His name was Lonnie Stroud, though Sera did not know that yet. The one on his left was lean and twitchy, already working something in his hand. A tactical folding knife, half open, catching what little light there was. The one on the right was broader and quieter, a length of steel rebar hanging loose at his side. 3 of them, triangulated. You got a real short memory, Lonnie said. His voice was the kind of low that didn't need volume to carry weight. Those were my boys you put on camera. That video cost us a considerable amount of money and a considerable amount of patience. Sera stopped walking. She was 22 feet from her car. She did the calculation without meaning to. The door, the key fob in her cardigan pocket, the angle of approach from each of them, the surface of the asphalt under her sneakers. Old habit, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it runs. She set her canvas tote down on the asphalt, gently, the way you set down something that matters. I called the police because 2 men were breaking into a car, she said. Her voice was even. That's not a short memory. That's a basic civic function. The twitchy one barked a short laugh and snapped the knife open all the way. Civic function. He repeated it like she'd told a joke he almost respected. Lady, do you know whose neighborhood this is? I teach here, Sera said. I know exactly whose neighborhood this is. Lonnie took 1 step forward. Then you know better than to pull out a phone. She looked at all three of them without hurrying, the way she looked at a problem on a whiteboard before she knew the answer. Patient, assessing, already 3 steps ahead. Then she reached up and unclipped the little cartoon sun barrette from her hair. It was a small movement. There was nothing aggressive about it. But something in the quality of the stillness that followed made the twitchy one stop spinning his knife. Sera's dark hair came down past her shoulders. She gathered it without looking, fingers moving from muscle memory, and wound it into a tight, low knot at the back of her head. She didn't have a hair tie. She pulled a rubber band from the consent forms she'd been carrying and used that instead. And then she was still. Not frozen. Still, the way a person is still when they have already run the math and are simply waiting for the other party to catch up. Somewhere behind her eyes, the parking lot of Ridgecrest Elementary dissolved, replaced by the sharp, cold smell of pine sap and wood smoke and gun oil. A dirt road in the Ozark foothills in February. Ice on every surface. Her breath coming out in hard white clouds. The voice of Colonel Ira Mack, somewhere behind her in the dark, telling her she had 30 seconds to find him before he found her first. She had been 16 when Ira Mack became the only family she had left. Her father and Ira had served together in the 7th Special Forces Group. When her parents died on a rain-slicked highway outside of Memphis. An ordinary Tuesday, an ordinary truck with failed brakes. Ira had driven 6 hours from his ranch in southern Missouri without being asked. He sat with her at the funeral home. He sat with her when the social worker came. He sat across from her at a diner booth and said plainly that she could come live with him, or she could go into the system, and that either way he would respect whatever she chose. She chose him. He didn't know how to raise a child. He knew how to raise a soldier, and he was careful about the difference. And he wasn't always successful. He told her that once, after her first serious training session, she was 17 and had dislocated her shoulder being thrown, and he'd poured himself a glass of water and looked at her with something uncomfortable in his eyes. "I don't know if I'm doing right by you," he said. "Are you teaching me to survive?" she asked. "Yes." "Then you're doing right by me." He was an 18 Delta, a Special Forces medical sergeant, and he believed to his core that understanding the human body was understanding the battlefield. He taught her anatomy the way a mechanic teaches an apprentice about an engine, with reverence for the machine and absolute clarity about what each part does and what happens when it fails. Pressure points, nerve clusters, vascular geography. He walked her through the infraorbital nerve and the sciatic trunk and the carotid sinus the way other guardians explained curfews, because these were the rules of the world she was being handed, and he wanted to understand them before the world explained them to her the hard way. "You're small," he told her once, not unkindly. "You're always going to be smaller than most of what tries to hurt you. So you don't fight big, you fight smart, you go for what the body can't argue with." She had spent 4 years in the Army after college. Combat medic first, then selected for the Special Operations Support Pipeline. She'd worked in places that didn't appear on civilian maps and came home intact, mostly, and made the decision to come home for good and do something that gave instead of took. She'd gotten her teaching credential and applied to Ridgecrest because it was under-resourced and over-enrolled and needed people who wouldn't leave after the first hard year. She hadn't left. The twitchy one lunged. He was fast, street fast, the kind that came from years of narrow escapes and split-second survival. He slashed wide, a lateral arc meant to open Sera's cheek and end the conversation before it began. She moved inside it. Not backward. In. It was the first thing Ira had corrected in her at 17. The instinct to retreat from a blade. Retreat gives the knife more room. Closing eliminates the arc. She had drilled the counter until it lived below conscious thought, and now her body did what it had been taught without asking her permission. She pivoted into his guard. The knife arm passed empty over her shoulder. She drove the heel of her palm upward into the infraorbital nerve. the cluster beneath the cheekbone that, when struck with precision, sends a signal the brain interprets as catastrophic, and felt the impact travel back up through her wrist exactly the way Ira had described it. The twitchy one's eyes went blank before the rest of him caught up. His legs buckled. She caught his knife arm as he fell, rotated the elbow over her forearm, and applied downward pressure with a short, deliberate movement. The sound was quiet and final. He went to the ground and stayed there. The knife skittered away across the asphalt. 2 seconds, maybe less. The bigger one hesitated for exactly 1 second too many. He came in with the rebar, a heavy, committed downward arc, meant to be the last thing she had to deal with. Sera read the shoulder drop before the arm moved. She stepped off the line, and as the rebar cracked the pavement where she had been standing, she drove her elbow into the sciatic nerve trunk at the back of his thigh with everything behind it. His right leg stopped working. He went down face first hard, the rebar clanging away. Before he could process what had happened, Sera put her knee between his shoulder blades, deliberately not on his neck, and held him there with enough weight to keep the calculation simple. "I'm 2 inches from your lumbar spine," she said quietly. "I'd rather not shift my position. Stay still and we're done in a minute." He stayed still. Sera looked up. Lonnie Stroud had not moved. He was standing exactly where he'd been, except that his hands were slightly raised now, palms out. A gesture so instinctive it had bypassed his pride entirely. The man who had walked into this parking lot owning it was looking at her the way people look at something they have badly miscalculated. She stood up from the bigger man slowly. She walked toward Lonnie and watched his hand twitch toward his waistband, and then stop, because his hand had been watching what his eyes had just seen, and his hand was smarter than his pride tonight. "Don't," she said. He didn't. She stopped 6 feet from him, close enough to read his face, far enough that he couldn't convince himself this was a situation he could still recover from through sheer size. "Here's what I know about you," Sera said. Her voice was the same voice she used for parent conferences. Measured, clear, not unkind. "You run a crew out of the Westfield corridor. You've been using the block behind this school as a staging area for at least 2 years. You have 12 and 13-year-old boys running lookout on Tuesday afternoons because they age out of juvenile jurisdiction in 4 years, and you know exactly what that means." Lonnie's jaw moved. "You don't." "I'm not finished." He stopped. 3 of my students," Sera continued, "are currently being recruited by people who work for you. I know their names. I've been watching it happen for a year, and I've been trying to pull them back one classroom at a time, which is an absurd way to fight this particular war, but it's the one I chose." She let that land for a moment. "Tonight you made a mistake. Not because you came after me. I'm fine, as you can see. You made a mistake because you gave me a reason to stop being patient." Lonnie stared at her. His neck tattoo shifted when he swallowed. "Your guys need medical attention," Sera said. "The one on the left has a fractured zygomatic arch and a probable grade 2 concussion. The one behind me, his sciatic nerve will come back online in a few hours, but he's going to need help getting up. You should take them to the ER." She paused. "Not the one on this block. The one on Sycamore. Less paperwork for everyone." The silence stretched. "Who are you?" Lonnie asked. Something had changed in his voice. Something she hadn't heard from him yet. Something that sounded almost human. "I teach 4th grade," Sera said. "I have 22 students. 9 of them are reading below grade level, and I run a literacy program 3 afternoons a week that the district stopped funding 2 years ago. That's who I am." She held his gaze. "You're going to pull your people back from this school's perimeter. No more corner boys on Tuesdays. No more recruitment. And if you have any reach at all over the 3 boys I mentioned, you're going to use it to leave them alone." She paused once more. "I'm not asking you to become a different person. I'm asking you to leave this one block alone. And if I don't, then I stop being a teacher about it." She let him sit with that for 4 full seconds. He didn't look away, but the thing behind his eyes had changed. Something had settled in and made itself at home there, and Sera recognized it. Ira Mack had explained it to her once. Real fear, the kind that lasts, doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't rattle or threaten. It moves in quietly and rearranges the furniture. Lonnie moved first. He gathered the bigger man by the collar, hauled him upright with considerable effort, then went back for the twitchy one. Neither of them said anything. They walked toward the street, Lonnie carrying most of the weight, the twitchy one listing badly to the left, the bigger man dragging his right leg. And then they turned south, and the sound of them faded, and then there was nothing but the parking lot and the October quiet. Sera stood still and listened until she was certain. Then she let out a breath. The tiredness that came after was a specific kind. Not the clean exhaustion of physical effort, but the deeper weight of carrying two lives inside the same body. The woman who had once kept a man from bleeding out on a hillside she couldn't name publicly, and the woman who had recopied the same permission slip 3 times this week because the copier on the second floor kept eating paper. Both of them were real. Both of them were hers, and she had stopped trying to decide which one mattered more. She walked back to her Civic and put the tote on the passenger seat. The consent forms had gotten crumpled during all of it. She'd have to redo a few of them tonight. She sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. There were 3 boys in her 4th period class who were not going to come back from where they were being walked toward if someone didn't pull hard enough in the other direction. She had been pulling. She would keep pulling. It was the slowest kind of work. Nothing like the clean, immediate resolution of a parking lot confrontation. Nothing that could be felt in the body as a decisive and final snap. It was the kind of work measured in months and small adjustments, and the occasional moment when a kid who hadn't spoken in class for 2 weeks raised his hand to answer a question. But it was the only kind that actually lasted. Sera started the car. She checked the mirror once. Empty lot, empty street, and pulled out onto Garfield Avenue heading home. Her 22 students would come in tomorrow morning and find their spelling tests on their desks, graded in red pen, with small encouraging notes in the margins in her careful handwriting. None of them would know what had happened tonight in the parking lot. That was the point. That had always been the point. Colonel Ira Mack had spent years making her dangerous, so she could spend the rest of her life choosing not to be. She had been making that choice every single day for 7 years running, in a mustard-colored cardigan, with a tote bag full of permission slips, with a cartoon sun barrette clipped back into her hair before she even reached the end of the block. She intended to keep making it. The school disappeared in her rearview mirror. The city folded in around her. And Sera Dunning drove home through the dark, already thinking about tomorrow.